So we're really excited to have you as part of the vlog and to talk a little bit about how you guys are counseling clients on clear communications during the COVID outbreak and all the changes that we're seeing. So really just excited to have you here. If you could just take a few minutes, introduce yourself and the company, and we'll go from there.
Thanks for having me. I'm Deanna Lorianni. I am co-founder and a communication strategist and trainer with Zuula. We are a Richmond, Virginia-based communication strategy firm. We were founded in 2008, and our sole focus is helping organizations and people create clear, compelling content.
And so I think that's really important right now, just so the folks who are watching it know. We have worked with Zuula for a long time, just teamed up on projects. So they sent out an email last week, sort of talking about clear communications during the time of COVID and linked to a blog that had 5 tips. And we really thought this was important information and we wanted to take some time to share it with everyone through the vlog. Um, so to get started, maybe you could take a few minutes just to talk about why clear communications is so important right now during this time of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good question. You know, the whole root of clear communications comes from the global plain language principles around clarity. And here we work from the perspective that people have a civil right to understand the information that's in their lives. So when you think about it from this angle, that means all of the language and design of every piece of content we interact with, whether that's a letter, an email, a website, a contract, it doesn't matter. All of that content should be so clear that we can easily do 3 things when we first read the content. That is, we need to be able to find what we need, understand what we find, and act on that information. And we should never have to go back to the content to get any of those points fulfilled.
Yeah, that's really important right now because there is so much information on COVID and the coronavirus. And sometimes you don't know what's reality, what's fact, and what's not. One thing that I know you guys focus on is just the legal obligations of companies to communicate. And I think that that's an important question right now is that some companies are legally obligated to communicate in terms of what's happening around this virus and the outbreak. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Real quick, before we dive into that, I did want to say one more thing about why clear communications matter so much during this time. I mean, they always matter, and so companies should always be communicating from that perspective. But when you're communicating during something like a pandemic, being able to access and understand information is even more crucial. If people don't understand the information you're giving them, they don't know how to act in order to be safe, to protect themselves, their family, their community, and not spread the virus among other needs. And in fact, some research shows that when communications to the public are uncertain and not clear during pandemics, that these uncertain communications can actually increase the pandemic's risk.
Mhm.
And the reason is that the communications don't know how, if they're not personal, they're not clear, they're not consistent, we don't know how to act for ourselves and be responsible. And once this climate starts creating itself, the result is an inability to act collectively. And so we undermine the cooperative action to actually get control over this. And I think we're seeing this play out right now in communications in real time, as you're mentioning, you know, especially right here in the US, where we have different messaging going on and it's swirling around and people are choosing to do different reactions in response of what they're hearing and seeing. So to overcome this threat and to, you know, come out on the other side stronger, we all need to be clear, consistent, and easy to understand the information we provide. So that was a detail I just wanted to make sure to get out there.
Yeah, thank you for adding that in. I think that's really important. And we've even seen that on our side of just trying to help clients in how they frame their communications during this time. A lot of times, I think the why they are doing something or acting in a certain way is so important, and we need to think long and hard about the strategy about what that why is and how
Absolutely.
that's interpreted and how that comes across. Um, but I know one of the things you guys work on a lot is just the legal obligations that companies have for communication.
Yeah.
And it seems like there are a lot of cases right now where legally companies are required to communicate in terms of what should employees do, what's happening with their business,
Mhm.
what can and can't be done. But talk about just the focus of clear communications from the legal aspect.
Sure. We often support companies that have to navigate a legal environment around what they can and cannot say. First, I'd say I'd advise anyone, any company that's confused about how to legally protect themselves and their employees, to consult with their legal counsel that will best reflect what they need to do for their industry. But generally, what it's helpful to think about is what you need to be doing is protecting your employees to protect your company. So you need to be communicating with them right now about how they can be safe, how they can contribute to stopping the spread of the virus, and also not get sick. And what that means if they are sick, what are those policies of how to interact within the company? What does that mean for them and you? And these communications must be accurate, and they also must be easy to act on. And so plain language supports all of those principles. Another thing to think about is you also need to make sure that you're providing whatever your official communication sources are, make sure that you're giving access to those sources to your employees. Don't only share them, but also make them accessible. Again, plain language principles goes, you need to be able to act and find that information on your first read. So providing access is also crucial. And then we'll
Yeah,
also look at, how you're informing your customers and the public that you interact with. Because a restaurant or a digital based company is going to have a different communication need and priority based on who their audience needs are. But that's another component in these crisis communications right now. And then obviously you have to document. I mean, to be able to show that you've been clear, you've been accessible, and you've been ongoing keeping people in the loop, that's really important. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so want to make sure that people are advising with their legal counsel on what they legally need to do. But that is a general environment I know that's important to communicate in right now.
that's really great advice. And on a lot of the communications we've been doing during this time, we have been working hand in hand with legal counsel, just to make sure that everything's covered, that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and that there's really no gaps in the legal liability in what we're trying to communicate. So I
Absolutely. And I
appreciate
think
you sharing that.
sometimes with companies, legal can seem like an entity outside of communications. It's a force that we need to pay attention to, but a lot of times people can get siloed within how these communications work together. And that's another aspect I want to stress is that legal is our friend in communications, and we need to help them as much as they help us. And so remembering that we're all in this together, and any way that we can strengthen our communications, both to protect us legally, but then also to protect those that we're interacting with, those who our customers are, those we care about. I think that team effort is really shining through across the board in the climate that we're in right now.
That's perfect. Good stuff there. So, in your email that you sent out last week, there were 5 tips for how companies can communicate during this time. And I wanted to see if you could take just a little bit to talk about 2 of those. The first one being the importance of transparency. And then the second one, making sure you use terminology like you and we, just to bring more sort of personality and involvement from the person who's receiving that communication.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And thank you so much for being interested to feature these language traits on how we can be clear. It's really important. With transparency, I think the writing's a bit on the wall there. Transparency breeds trust. When people trust you, they're more inclined to listen, comply, and act. Plus, if we go back to plain language principles, we have a right to understand the information that affects us. And if we can't understand that information, or if we can't easily find it because the content's language, design, or publishing format makes the information not transparent, then we're already in jeopardy because we can't act. Well, at least act in a way that's positive.
Right.
Just putting communication out there doesn't mean you've actually communicated. If people can't find or understand it, then you've not achieved that goal. So something else to keep in mind too is the fact that humans make decisions first with their emotions, and then our logic kicks in. If we're afraid and we're confused and we don't have transparent details to help us understand what's going on, we'll make decisions out of that place of fear because the brain craves certainty. If messages are vague or if they're ambiguous, missing, or difficult to find, we'll fill in the blanks and we'll create answers we want, even if that answer isn't correct. And that's not just an emotional response. Our brain wants that. Our brain craves certainty. So it's going to kick in to help us out, even if it's incorrect information. And so this is why clarity matters so much. And then also there's a bottom line aspect of keeping things clear and transparent, because when you're communicating transparently, you don't have to spend a lot of time and resources sending additional communications to clarify the confusion. That could mean, every company has a different relationship with what that means to them. But for big companies, that could be millions of dollars they're saving because they're not printing follow-up letters, they're not having to staff call centers as much. And so that transparency even hits to the bottom line if you want to look at it that perspective too. And then there's, of course, the brand perspective. We're in the age of people wanting and expecting transparency, whether that means, how companies source their products or how employees, what the salaries are between people. Transparency rules today. And so I think across the board, transparency is just good for business too.
Right. Well, it's really interesting because just today we were on a phone call, and one of the individuals on the call, this wasn't with a client, but just a group of individuals on a committee. One of the individuals was just a little bit hysterical in terms of what's going to happen to everybody, and how business is going to be affected. And I sort of, based on what you just said, I sort of wonder if maybe her thought process has really been maybe manipulated in some way by what she's been exposed to and what she's been watching, or reading, or hearing, and then how her brain is then interpreting that information. Because on the flip side, I'm hearing how other people are being really innovative in this time and figuring out, how do we keep our business up and running? How do we create or implement new technology to keep things happening? And so I think it's all in that perspective, but really you are influenced by how you are receiving that information and how you're interpreting it.
Absolutely. And it's something that, I think we grow up communicating, it's something that's in our lives. And I think it's really easy to take for granted when communication is broken. Or even when communication is working, because not people don't always aren't always able to recognize even why something's working in our communications, not just the negative. But absolutely, I think anything, we have a relationship. There's the person on the receiving end of the communication. They have a relationship to pay attention, their responsibility to be aware and to care about that communication. But really that relationship starts with the person, the company that's sending out that communication. Because
Right.
if you're writing something or sharing content, any type of communication that's unclear, and that could be everything from literally using extremely long sentences with like 68 words in them, using dense paragraphs, to even the functional design of how you've created structure in a document. As soon as that's broken, you directly lost my ability to care, even if I went into this communication caring and wanted to pay attention. And so I think that's also another element we forget, is the responsibility we hold, and making sure that what goes out is clear. That relationship, that responsibility isn't all on the reader. If they don't understand, you can't fully blame them if you sent out something that was confusing.
So interesting question for you here as we kind of wrap things up is, I sort of feel like maybe over the last 2 weeks, communication from a lot of different sources has not been clear and concise. Would you agree with that?
I really think it depends on who you're looking at, what you're paying attention to. I've seen companies that are doing it well. I've seen companies that aren't. I've seen government officials that aren't, and I've seen government officials that are doing it well. So, I don't know if there's a blanket statement, but I think and it is a good assumption to say everyone's kind of freaked out. So writing communications from a perspective of that, of being worried, being uncertain, it is easy to have those character traits or those fears, those anxieties enter into the communications. And even if we didn't intend for that to create in our tone or in our structure or whatever it is that we're doing, or wording choices. So a couple examples that I thought I could share is, there's one example actually from Dr. Emily Landon. She's the chief infectious disease epidemiologist at the University of Chicago Medicine.
Right.
The other day, she gave a press conference on how they're preparing for the virus and why this matters to the public. Perhaps you saw it. I know it's making the rounds of being pretty, wow, people are impressed by what she had to say. And so I think she actually did a great job of, she's being empathetic. She's talking directly to people. She's using first and second person voices, which it makes sure that people are included in the conversation. Saying something like, we understand your worry, or it's important, your safety matters to us. That's a good example. Your safety matters to us. That has a different tone than if you said, it is important to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Instantly, I have a different emotional connection of how that matters to me. And so I think she's also done a good job. She uses that first and second person. She doesn't use jargon or confusing terminology that stops people from understanding or paying attention. And that's something she could very easily have done as a medical professional. And then she's transparent. She admits what they know. She admits what they don't know. She admits what they're ready for and what they're not for, and what the next steps are. And so I think she's a really strong example I think it doesn't matter if you're in government or if you're in a company, she's doing it right.
That's helpful to see and to hear about some of those examples. I know just for ourselves and this vlog that we've been doing, we've been trying to make sure that we're empathetic in how we're talking about this. I mean, you have communications people who are at home and trying to handle kids being at home with them, and at the same time their job duties and producing communications material for their own company in terms of what's happening there. And so there's stressful situations that are going on, and we want to try to communicate that through our language and the things that we're saying and how we're saying that. But also be a really key resource in just providing information that's helpful, whether it's involving social media or media relations, or even how to communicate using different forms of technology. So it's good to hear those examples.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you just segued perfectly into one of the last things I wanted to say is, I think it's great that you're doing this vlog series to help people. I really do, because I feel like that's one of the positives I've seen come out of this environment, is how the community rallies together to lift each other up. I know that there's a lot of doom and gloom. It's dominating the media headlines and probably even dominating our listeners' hearts and minds. I know it's been on my mind, it's been on my family's, and my friends. And, but I think that our community here in Richmond, and I know this is elsewhere in the country, it's amazing. And we can get through this environment. And already I'm seeing that happen in big and little ways by doing gestures like this with your vlog series. It's, coming together to help each other through this. We'll get through this, and every little bit helps, just like this moment right now. So thank you for this opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, and I'll include a link below to your website, and we'll make sure that we stay in touch throughout this process. Super excited to have you here to talk about some things in clear communications. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments below.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Again, it's been a pleasure, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Deanna.
Right.